Hello and welcome to the Garden Revival BBQ, the podcast where we answer your big burning questions about gardening and don't grill any hamburgers. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we're very serious about plants. We record the podcast live on our Discord server. Join our gardening community on gardenrev.com/discord. I am your host, IG, the Indecisive Gardener, and this is part 2 of our chat with Director of Growing Operations Wes about professional greenhouse operations, followed by those wonderful yet big and burning questions from our audience. So, where were we? Oh yes, I was about to ask some questions about light in the greenhouse. Do you do anything special to give your poinsettias a dark period, or is it just naturally happening in the right proportions of light and dark because of the time of year you grow them?
Yeah, so for poinsettias specifically, this is very topical because this morning I was working on my space planning for our 2025 poinsettia production because we actually have to order our cuttings within the next week so that we can make sure we get what we want. But the answer is both. So when it comes to poinsettias and mums, these are plants that put their color on once the day length becomes less than 12 hours. So it really depends on how far, what latitude you live on. So I used to live in Washington. We were really high north. Our day length is way different than someone who's growing poinsettias like in Texas, right?
Right, yeah.
But the answer is, if kind of the general rule of thumb for poinsettias specifically is if you're growing poinsettias to sell at or after Thanksgiving, you don't need to treat them differently. If you're going to grow poinsettias before Thanksgiving, then they do require a blackout. And so I've worked in greenhouses where we did this for mums, where literally every night we'd go back to the greenhouse and pull black plastic over the entire mum crop and then come in early in the morning and take it all off. But I'm happy to say now I work in a greenhouse that has an automated system. So whatever time you set it at, it's a black shade cloth that goes along all the walls and on the roof, and it just completely blacks out the light. And then we keep light sensors in there that we track every night to make sure we don't have any light pollution.
That's awesome.
That could cause color delay.
Yeah. What about just light in general? Do you ever have to supplement with grow lights, or is just the light coming from the sun through the glass sufficient for everything?
So it mostly depends on the time of year. But the prudent thing, which is what we do, is typically, so we have our own weather station, and they're outside the greenhouse, and they measure, they measure everything a weather station measures. So not only light quality, but also, wind and if it's raining and things like that, because like the windows on the greenhouse will shut when it's raining so that water doesn't get in and that sort of thing. But there's a lot of rebates that the government gives to change out the old style lights and put in LEDs. So you mostly see LEDs these days. But what we'll do is we'll have a light sensor that's actually underneath, right at the plant canopy height. So it can basically measure the amount of light that the plant itself is receiving, and it will sum the amount of light that comes from the grow lights and from the sun. So I'll use cuttings as an example because this is something that's really sensitive. The quality of cuttings is really, really tied to the quality of light, amongst many other things. But we measure light. Instantaneous light readings are measured by watts per square meter, and we look at something that's called a daily light integral, which is kind of a way to measure the quantity of light received in a one-day period. And this is a confusing unit, but it's measured by the watts per square meter per second. And that number is what is called a mole, MOL. It's not a molecule, it's called a mole. And so for optimum cutting quality, we are aiming for a range of 7 to 12 moles per day. And the number that we're always shooting for is to get 10 moles on these cuttings every single day. So, last week, yes, it's cold, but it's very sunny outside. And my light sensor is telling me that I am receiving, I being the cutting, I guess, I'm receiving 10 moles that day. The system will never turn the lights on. 2 days ago, it's very cloudy, and the system is realizing that it is not going to hit its mole amount, and it leaves the lights on. And for a cutting that is not really sensitive to daylight changes, if I can hit my mole amount by 10 a.m., I can shut the lights off for the rest of the day But if I have to have the lights on until midnight to hit the amount of moles I need that day, then the lights will stay on until midnight, and that's just the price you pay. So basically, we have to add the sunlight and the grow lights to determine what our plants are actually receiving. And every plant has kind of a different target. There are kind of generalized categories you can place plants in. So, like certain things will want 26 moles, or something can do less and will only need, 18 or whatever it is. So, grow lights are meant to supplement the sun. It is very rare that you don't let the sun play a factor in it. Like it's would be
Mm-hmm.
really rare. I mean, I'm not really talking about cannabis because that's something completely separate, but it's really rare in a ornamental greenhouse where you'd have a building that occludes the sunlight and you're only using your lights to grow because the sun is free, right? So
Yeah, it would be pretty
maybe
wasteful.
yeah, so maybe like in a germination chamber where you're really trying to rapidly germinate seeds, you might have that be enclosed like a cooler that you can really control the environment on, and you could use the lights because that's enough for a young seedling. But for almost everything, whether it's plastic or glass or whatever, you want to use the sun because it's there anyways. So I hope that kind of answers. I know it's really
Yeah,
complex, and then you can
yeah.
start getting into to different light spectrums and how that all works. But yes, we do use grow lights to augment what we get from the sun.
Now that you mentioned spectrum, I have to ask, do you use blurple or do you use pleasing white light?
Okay, so when LEDs kind of first came out, they were really this like aggressive blurple, and like my first day on the job at a greenhouse, I was given these like yellow sunglasses with yellow lenses, and
Really?
like because I am an early bird, I'd rather go to work at 5 a.m. and that's just how I am. So, if I'm in there in the greenhouse and it's dark outside and the only lights I see are purple, all the plants read to the human eye as black. So it's really difficult to see what you're looking at. It's really difficult
Hmm.
to determine the quality of the plants or to detect any
Right.
issues.
Yeah.
But if you put these yellow lenses on, then it actually normalizes what you're seeing to your human eye. So I
Oh,
spent
that's
like the first
amazing.
year with these dumb yellow glasses on, but now a lot of the LED manufacturers have really realized that they don't need to be that aggressive with the purple lighting, so
Hmm.
like you can order lights with all different combination of like 10% white, 40% light blue, 60% or like 40% red and 20% far red or whatever it is. So there's all these different recipes, and most of them are designed for yes, plant quality, but also worker comfort. So a lot of them, they
Mm,
appear
right.
pink when you're standing outside of them, but then when you're actually standing in the path of the light, it feels a lot whiter, and the plants actually read more accurate to the human eye.
Are the brands of the lights you use ones that the home gardener might be familiar with?
Phillips?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah.
not like Hydro Farmer or Spider Farmer, whatever they're called, Mars Hydro.
Um, Kind of a general rule of thumb is if it says hydro in the brand, it's targeting cannabis greenhouses. But there is a lot of light manufacturers, but Philips is one of the biggest ones. For many different historical reasons, the vast majority of greenhouse tech and innovation comes from the Netherlands. Philips is a Dutch company, so they are there. That is the future of greenhouse production is always coming from the Netherlands.
Oh, that's fascinating, as the great Spock would say.
That doesn't mean that there's not other good manufacturers or anything, of course,
Yeah.
but you ask if they're common names, and I think everybody's probably heard of Philips.
Yeah, honestly, they hadn't been on my radar. I have Barina, I love. Uh, I don't know, Phillips for some reason wasn't on my radar, and I will definitely look into it now. Because if they're
Yeah.
good enough for you, they're good enough for me.
Yeah, well, if you find any, let me know. We'll take a look at them.
Yeah, great, thank you. You mentioned earlier that you use PGRs, plant growth regulators. What kind of things do you use that for? What situations?
Yeah, so this is an area that I really, really enjoy.
Yeah.
So I'll try to not go on for an hour about this, but I definitely could. Um, okay, so kind of the before we get into like what the differences between them are, kind of the question is like why would you need it in the first place? So one thing to think about is when you're producing in a greenhouse, it's a lot more similar to a factory than it is to a garden. Okay, we
Mm-hmm.
are trying to
Yeah.
produce repeatable products that have a consistent quality to them so that the customer knows exactly what they're getting. And, if I'm producing something in my backyard, I don't really care how big it gets in a pot if the whole goal is I'm going to carry it 50 feet and put it in the ground in my borders, right? But in the greenhouse, we have the added headache of we have to put it in a truck and ship it to a store.
Right.
And then it also has to be pleasing to the customer's eye in the store. So, of course, our number one goal when it comes to producing plants in a greenhouse is quality. We want the people who buy plants from us to be pleased with what we ship them. And then we want their customers, which is the home gardener, to be happy with what they buy. But for better or for worse, what a customer sees when they're in a nursery and thinks represents a good plant isn't necessarily the same thing as what a good, normally growing plant is. So, so I'll get to that. But one of the considerations besides that we have as greenhouse growers is trucking. Okay, so we have a semi trailer. It can fit 42 racks in it, and the more plants I can fit on a rack, the more profit I can make as a grower, or the
Right.
less trucks I have to send to a store. Because if I have a store that's telling me I want, you know, I want to buy 100 racks worth of plants, if I can squeeze that into 75 racks, I can maybe send, one semi and one smaller truck, and then I don't have to send two semis that cost me more. So I think it's something that people aren't really like that happy to hear. But one of our considerations when it comes to how we grow plants is we do think about how many we can fit on a rack, right? If I can
Mm-hmm.
grow a nice compact white alyssum 6-pack where the plant is 2 inches tall and has a flower on it, I can do tighter rack spacing or tighter shelf spacing on my rack than if I have to grow alyssum that's 6 inches tall before it gets a flower on it. So if I can satisfy stores' orders using fewer trucks, there's less shipping costs associated with it. Now, that is like a whole realm of data analysis, but that is one of the reasons why we use PGRs. So the kind of general idea of what a PGR is, and there's many different ones that act in many different ways, is I have a plant, it's growing. I want to reduce the amount of stretch that the plant will have, and we grow things tight in the greenhouse. They typically want to grow up. And so I can apply a plant growth regulator that will actually reduce the amount of internode space in between leaves so that will keep the plant more compact.
Mm-hmm.
And typically what the end goal is I'll have a plant that's more compact when it blooms so that it looks more presentable to the customer when you ship it. I'm sure everybody who listens to this who has bought plants at a nursery has bought something that's nice, tight, compact, covered with flowers. Then they go plant it in the ground, and all of a sudden it's scraggly and 2 feet wide with a few flowers on it, right?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that is because of plant growth regulators. And it's not meant to be misleading. The reality is, and I've seen this, if you put a flat of alyssum that's been treated with plant growth regulators and is nice and tight and compact with flowers on it, and you put it next to a flat of one that is grown naturally with no plant growth regulators, customers will always go to the one that looks nicer and they'll leave the more natural one and they won't even buy it. Even when the one that was PGR'd is gone, they still won't buy the one that was grown naturally because it
Wow.
looks rangy to them. So, um, not only is there a nicer presentation to the end customer and it ships better, but one of the other things is the reality of the greenhouse is you can only divide it so much. So you're always compromising on your space. And so there will be times, no matter what, unless you only grow one crop, where you have a greenhouse space that has a couple of different crops in it that are maybe at different stages of growing, and you have to compromise on what your environment is so that you can't give any one crop the perfect environment. You can give all the crops a okay environment. And that is another case where you'd use PGRs on these crops to kind of make up for, let's say you have something that's growing 3 degrees warmer than it really needs to.
Mm-hmm.
You may apply a PGR to help keep that growth controlled so that way the negative effects of it not being in the perfect environment can be canceled out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other growth regulators that don't just affect internodal stretch. One that probably everybody here is familiar with would be like an IBA rooting hormone. You know, plant growth regulators essentially are just exogenous hormones that are applied to the plant that induce different physiological processes in the plant. So, rooting hormone is no different. It is a plant growth regulator. We use it in the greenhouse on cuttings. So yes, just like a home gardener, we're dipping cuttings in powder and sticking them in a tray. Or we actually can also have the farm do it and they get shipped to us with powder on them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also sprays that you can use that will induce rooting as well. But there's some other ones. A really common one is called Florel, and it does have a little bit of growth regulation in terms of size control. But what you really use it for is bud abortion. So if you have a crop like a geranium, for example, a geranium is really, really quick to set bud and to set flower.
Yep.
And oftentimes it will do that when the plant is really too small to be saleable. And what you end up doing is you send a crew through your crop to actually pick off all of these buds. And that's super labor intensive. It's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
No one likes doing it. And Florel, if you can time it correctly, you can actually do a treatment of Florel or two treatments of Florel on your geranium crop. And right when the plant begins to set that bud, it will actually become aborted. And geraniums, to tie back to something we said earlier, geraniums are a really good example here because Florel, it doesn't actually work inside the plant. It's actually, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. It's actually a gas that is in solution. And so when you spray it on the plant, it coats the leaf surface and then it begins emitting ethylene gas, which we talked about before. So
Oh, okay.
the bud gets set and it has a super high concentration of ethylene gas right at the bud site, and that causes premature abortion of the bud. So that way it just withers and falls off, and then it lasts on the plant for somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks, depending on conditions, and then the plant buds like normal again. By that time, you have a plant that's ready to ship. Then you want a flower on it, it sets the bud, and then you move on. There are plant growth regulators that actually act at the node that will okay, not to get too much into plant physiology here, but I think people are somewhat familiar with the concept of apical dominance.
Yep.
So the idea that you have a plant that has a growth tip, and that growth tip will always be given priority by the plant to grow over latent buds that are lower than that growth tip. And as gardeners, all the time we are pruning to induce branching or we're pinching. Well, there are plant growth regulators that actually get applied to the plant as a spray, and they will change the auxin concentration in the plant to eliminate this apical dominance so that way you can have buds lower down start to branch out. And it's basically referred to as a chemical pinch. So instead of sending a crew to pick that growth tip out of all these plants, you can do a one-time spray using your handy irrigation boom, and you can have relatively same effect.
Wow.
Of course, some plants are more sensitive to it. Some plants really are kind of recalcitrant and have to have a physical pinch. But it just depends on the crop. But there's a lot of different things that can be done. And it's actually, in my mind, it's one of the really cool things about growing. So
Yeah.
I always tell my growers, like, we have a, so like every crop that we grow will have a stake in it that tells us exactly what crop it is, who it's for, what week we're going to ship it. And I always tell my growers when they do these treatments, take the plant that stake is in, take it out of the crop, do the treatment, and then put it back. So you always have a control, because it's really actually fascinating to see how well some of these growth regulators work and what a difference you can get. And probably, if you'd like, I could probably find some pictures of some big, big differences between treated and untreated plants.
I will never say no to pictures, you know that.
Okay, I'll try to find some for you.
Thank you. You mentioned quite a bit of automation, actually. Is there other automation, like do you use potting machines?
Yeah, there's a lot of automation. There's a lot of really cool stuff, and again, most of it comes from the Netherlands. So I probably have some videos of all this stuff that I can send you as well. But when it comes to transplanting, especially if you consider when you're seeding plants, they're in like a 288 cell tray. There's transplanters that actually have like grippers that are set to the distances between the cells of the tray. So you run a tray in, it will actually transplant all your seed plugs by itself, and then it comes out the other end. And instead of having people to physically place all of the plants in, they are at the end of the machine. So the tray comes out, and then they put the tags in the pots, and then they get loaded and brought into the greenhouse. One piece of tech that I think is super cool is a cutting sticking machine. So this is I'm trying to think of a quick, simple way to explain this. So you put all your cuttings, you have this bag of 100, like I talked about.
Hmm.
You put it on a
Yeah.
belt and you spread them out. They go into the machine that has a photo eye. The photo eye looks at every single cutting and it determines the cutting's orientation. And then a robotic arm comes and grabs the cutting by the right orientation and then actually sticks it into the cell in the tray. And
That's so cool.
and the really cool thing is that all of these machines throughout the world, and there's not very many of them because they're very expensive, they're all connected to each other. And so they use
What?
machine learning. And so every time that photo eye takes a picture of a cutting and does the analysis of it, it is teaching all of the other machines on the planet doing this so that they
Wow.
all are getting better over time.
Oh, wow.
It's really cool. And then another one that is like fascinating to watch is okay, so when you sow seeds, you always have a certain amount that don't germinate. You see on your seed packet, even as a home gardener, it'll
Yeah.
say, yield test is 78% or whatever. And what that means is like in absolute perfect conditions, that's the highest amount of germination percent you can expect. So in the greenhouse, you can get close, but typically those tests are done in a lab in a germ chamber, which is like one step farther along the standardization process. So usually you're a little bit under it. But customers, if you're selling these seed plugs, a customer won't accept a tray that has 288 cells, but maybe only has 225 plants in it.
Uh-huh.
Because if you're using a transplanter, the machine can't tell if there is a plant in the cell or not. So it'll grab an empty cell and plant it in a pot, and then you have to have a person after the machine to take a good plant and put it in the pot that didn't get one. So there's a machine that can take these partial plug trays. Same kind of idea. The tray goes in the machine. A photo eye takes a picture of it. It can determine every single empty cell on the tray. It goes over a bed of compressed air jets that shoots all of the soil of the empty cells out. Then it goes into another section of the machine that then plants it with good plugs from another machine. And it gives you at the end a tray that has 100% full cells with even size plugs in it. So
Oh,
um,
wow.
it's really, really cool. And then, on top of that, there's like robots in the greenhouse where and this is all for ornamental stuff. On the vegetable side, they have, like harvesters and all sorts of crazy stuff in the greenhouse they can do.
Wow.
But a lot of it too is like I know a company that has a full table system in their greenhouse, and the night before their orders are supposed to go out, they look through the computer and they see, okay, I need, whatever it is, I need 10,000 of these size petunias and I need 5,000 of these or whatever. They go through the greenhouse and they see all the tables that have the plants they want. They put all the table numbers in the computer and say, okay, I want these for shipping tomorrow. And then overnight, everybody's gone, and there's robots that shuffle all the tables around and bring all of the ones that will be
Oh
used
my
for
God.
shipping the next day to the front of the line. Yeah, it's incredible. So that when
Oh,
the
wow.
when the crew comes in the next day, all the tables with the plants they actually want to ship are right in front, and they don't have to walk through the whole greenhouse to pick up plants. They just grab them right from these tables and then send the empty ones out, and they just go to the next. So it actually reduces, well, wear and tear on the crew and also just total labor hours by quite a bit. And it's just all done by robots overnight. It's really, really impressive.
Wow. I sincerely hope nobody's playing a drinking game with every time I say wow because they would be in the hospital by now. Wow. So it really sounds like you love your job.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that I have a job that I like as much as I do. One thing I say a lot is there's an awful lot of industries that are a lot easier to make a living in. I
Hmm.
in the spring I work like 80 to 90 hours a week. I see my wife like on Sunday only for a few hours.
No.
Like it takes a lot, but it takes a lot because I care a lot.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of industries that are a lot easier to make a living in. But I think there are very few that are as rewarding. And I'll say, like when it's Saturday night and you've had a long week, you go into the shipping area and you just see like thousands of racks of plants that you grew that are like perfect. It really
Yeah.
doesn't get much better than that. That's really, really enjoyable. And yeah, the greenhouse has problems. We have crops die, we have issues, but solving those problems and figuring out what the cause is and then learning how to avoid them it's a big puzzle and it's something that I really enjoy. And now being more on the operation side, it's kind of like all about efficiency, right? So yes, we talk about like weighing plants, but we're also timing how long projects go and stuff like that. And yeah, my wife jokes that like, when I'm at home and we're like planning to get ready to go out, like I put a big plan in place and I'm like, okay, if we do it in this order, then we can get out of here 5 minutes earlier. She's like, this is really the perfect job for you, right? So you get to go play with plants all day and just try to improve day after day. And so, it's not easy. It's really challenging. And I think if someone didn't love plants, they would have a hard time seeing why it would be worth the amount of work that it is. But it's a passion industry, like
Yeah.
something I always say is like we're not curing cancer, we're not saving people's lives, we're growing flowers that people enjoy, and at the end of the day, I've been in stores and customers will come up like when I worked in the nursery and be like, look at this picture of my garden, you helped me pick out these plants and they just look
Oh,
incredible and I go out every day and I love
that's
it,
wonderful.
it's awesome. Like, yeah, we're not changing the world here, but we're doing something that brings people joy, and it's really an enjoyable thing. So, yeah, it's tough, but it's really worth it, and I really love what I do.
And now a word from one of our community members.
Hey everyone, this is Mike, also known as Frostline Gardener from Bozeman, Montana. Hey, did you know that every time somebody subscribes to the Garden Revival BBQ, a seed germinates? Help make this a greener world. Subscribe now. And please don't fact check me.
Nah, I believe you, Mike. Here are the BBQs, the big burning questions. KDEC or Kadiak? Sorry, don't know how to pronounce your nickname. How can I keep aphids, whiteflies, and other pests from hanging out on brugmansias and from getting to other plants that happen to be in the same greenhouse or in close proximity to them? What really works for pest control? Any nursery licensed quality products that we might be able to acquire as standard citizens or make? Not the neem oil. That doesn't seem to work very well. LOL.
Um, okay, Brugmansias, I don't have any special recommendations for that because those pests, they affect an awful lot of crops. You know, it sounds so obvious, but trying not to get them in the first place is number one. So, especially if you're in a home greenhouse and a few of these plants, watching them every day,
Mm-hmm.
or checking them as often as you can. A couple of aphids or a couple of whitefly eggs are really easy to wipe off. Once you have your plants loaded with them, it's a whole different issue.
Yeah.
The reality is, when it comes to what homeowners can use, is this. If there was a simple product you could make at home that really worked, then all of the chemicals wouldn't exist.
Yep.
You hear a lot of stuff of vinegar, soap, whatever.
Yep. Yep.
They work to an extent, but they only work as well as you apply them. So like, yeah, soapy water is great, but if you do it once a month, you're really not going to be getting things under control. And my other issue, I don't want to say like any particular brand names or anything, but there are very few pesticides that are legal for homeowner use. And one of the issues is that one of the very most common ones is imidacloprid. That's the active ingredient. It is in a ton of homeowner labeled products, and
Mm-hmm.
it is one of the most dangerous neonics that exists. So,
Oh,
homeowners really want to be like they want to be cognizant of this. They want to not affect bees and things like that. But unfortunately,
right.
of the products
Right.
that exist, that's one of the worst. It's actually in many areas of the world, it's banned for commercial use because it's such an issue. So that's kind of crazy to me as a commercial grower that like, you know, a lot of times people look at what we do as we're using these dangerous chemicals and stuff like that, but actually what you can go get at the box store is just as bad or actually typically worse, right? um,
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I like, and this actually unfortunately doesn't really work for aphids, is spinosad. So I think the one of the common formulations is like Captain Jack's, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
I might have to check that out, but that's like it's not actually a bacteria, but it's like a protein from a bacteria that works inside the digestive system of insects, and it has no negative impact on humans. And it's also really safe to bees because it doesn't get transferred into the pollen of the plant.
That's great.
That's a nice one. Like I said, it unfortunately doesn't work against aphids. It's something that's more used for like caterpillars and also does work for thrips. So there are good options out there for some pests, but like aphids, they're just a pain. Typically, what you see is that they congregate at the growth tip of the plant because they have the
Hmm.
softest tissue, and so it's easiest for the aphids to get the sap out of there. So if you can't wipe them off, typically I just cut those tips off.
That's what I do. I sacrifice rose blooms because I can't stand the aphid tips.
I do the exact same thing. I actually learned like I was reading one of Don's books and he's talking about his like fava beans and how they always get aphids bad, but it's only at the tips. And so he's like, just pinch them off. First of all, you can leave it; it's not that big of a deal. But if it bothers you, just pinch them off because the lower parts
Yeah.
don't get them. And I started doing that with all my plants at home because at home I never ever spray. I try not to do it at home because I have no like protection for pollinators. All the plants I grow for my garden, I grow outside. So I really try, I don't try not to
Hmm.
use chemicals. I just don't.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to aphids, I use my thumbs, I wipe them off. I try to smash them. And if that doesn't work, then I just try to pinch those pots off.
See, that's not an option for me. I'm way too creeped out.
So soap does work, but like, okay, so one of the approaches to pest control is learning about the lifestyle or life cycle, excuse me, of the plant. I don't think we really care what the lifestyle is. We care
I
about the
don't
life
know.
cycle of the
They might
pest.
be absolute deviants.
Yeah, maybe we don't want to know. So like when it comes to spider mites, right? And I'm not going to name any chemicals to use for spider mites because it doesn't really matter, but the point is a spider mite's life cycle is typically between 7 and 14 days depending on what the temperature is. So when it's warmer, it's a little faster, when it's cooler, it's a little shorter. So if I am using, let's just say a chemical or soapy water or whatever for spider mites, but I spray it every 3 weeks, well, I have one, two, or three generations of spider mites that are occurring during that time period. So if I
Right.
know that a
Yeah.
spider mite life cycle is typically between 7 and 14 days, then I would want to treat like on a 6 day rotation, maybe 3 or 4 times, so that I can make sure I'm targeting every viable life stage of that spider mite.
Right.
And it's same for aphids. Aphids actually are more difficult because they are born pregnant. That's an oversimplification of what
What?
happens with aphids. Very interesting to read about.
Oh my
But
God, they're tribbles.
yeah, so they undergo something called parthenogenesis, and like this is oversimplifying to the point of almost being not true. But effectively, they're born pregnant, and so their life cycle is a lot shorter, but what that means is that there are typically many more generations of them on a plant at the same time. So,
Wow.
so when it comes to using something like soap or any of the things that are available to home gardeners, the key is consistent application and short time frames. Spraying once a month, spraying
Gotcha.
anything once a month is not going to help. I would aim for 5 days, basically every 5 days, 4 times in a row or whatever, 4 or 5 times, and then see how that goes. But that to me, with home gardeners, like what I've seen working in the nursery, is that they think they're just going to do it once and move on with their life, and that's typically not how it works.
Yeah. The other thing is now those biological controls are available to homeowners,
Yep.
but you like you said, you have to keep up with it because of the life cycle of the bugs. So
Yeah,
you'll have
absolutely.
to keep getting more generations to keep the population going to get your pest problem under control, right?
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Like with nematodes and things like that, you really need to be applying them on a frequent basis so that you can kind of keep their populations up. But in the garden, you also have a lot of more naturally occurring predators. So, like in my garden in Washington, I had aphids, of course, same as anybody. But when I really look at them, I would see some were mummified by parasitic wasps that existed in the area.
Huh.
And one of the parasitic wasps that is grown for greenhouse use actually is native to United States. So they just rear them in a facility and send them out. But if they get out of the greenhouse, they're not like risking the ecosystem or anything.
Okay. Okay, our next question. Anna asks, what annuals do you believe to be worth the money to buy from nurseries, and which ones are not so much worth the money that your average gardener is better off growing from seed?
Okay, this is an awesome question because it kind of gets to the heart of what is a greenhouse for.
Uh-huh.
And what it really comes down to is this. If you're a gardener at home and you have space and time to grow annuals from seed, then there's very little reason that would be compelling for you to buy it at a nursery. So I've talked about Alyssum several times. It's kind of my like classic go-to, kind of quick and cheap and easy annual that
Hmm.
people plant in big portions. So, if I'm a home gardener and I have a light setup and a heat pad, or I have a greenhouse or something, I can buy a pack of seeds for what it would cost me to go buy a six pack of Alyssum at a store, right? So,
Yeah.
I really enjoy gardening. So, like for me, the cost to benefit analysis just really isn't there. I can have 5 times the number of plants or more from a pack of seeds, and I can enjoy the process versus I just go buy them and I get six and I go home and plant them and that's it. But a lot of people don't have that luxury of space or time. People are busy, and also
Hmm.
like people don't really have the ability to have a dedicated seed growing space. I'm fortunate enough to have a wife that doesn't mind me having baker racks in my kitchen with the grow lights on them, but I understand not everybody's got that. So when it comes especially to like varieties of seed that you can buy in a seed pack, the question is time and money and space.
Right.
So I can't really say, there's X petunia that you should absolutely buy in a greenhouse because you shouldn't grow it from seed. The point is, can you and do you want to? A big cost for the greenhouse is heat, especially this time of year. It's 25 degrees outside right now. So we
Mm.
have big boilers running. We use a ton of fuel to run these boilers. And so there is a cost benefit to people buying plants from us because we are taking on the time and effort of heating our greenhouse to grow these plants earlier. We assume that we're talking about buying plants that we can plant on the day after the absolute last frost day. We're not always lucky to hit this timing, but as you go farther in the season, when you have heat outside or temperatures outside that are conducive to growing plants from seed, the benefit of the greenhouse grown plants goes down if you have the space. If you don't have the space, then the benefit of a greenhouse plant will always be there. The second part of that, which is what's not so much worth the money, is kind of what I said. What are you willing and capable and have space to produce at home? But when it comes to plants that are grown from cuttings, or like what we call premium plants, you know, you can't really get those for the home market. So the only way to buy them is from a nursery. So kind of what I've always done is I look through seed catalogs, and when I go to the nursery, if it's stuff I know I could just buy a seed pack for, then I'm probably not going to buy it from the greenhouse. Now, as
Yeah.
a general manager of a greenhouse, I should say you should buy every single thing you can from a greenhouse. Um, but the reality is the benefit there for you? Spending the $3 or $4 for a six pack, is that going to save you the time and space and headache of the $3 or $4 and the 8 weeks it takes you to grow those plants from seed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I can't answer that question universally because it just depends on the gardener, but it's kind of an interesting way to think about, what really is the benefit of the greenhouse in the first place.
And then some stuff is just too hard to root. Like even in your business, it's not a profitable plant to grow because it's so difficult to root. So it's probably not something that a homeowner would be able to root either.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And like, for me, when I was approaching my garden, it's really, really easy for me to go buy a tree or a shrub because, yeah, maybe I could go take a cutting of that shrub from my neighbor's house, but it'll take me 3 to 5 years to have it be rooted out in a 1 gallon size when I could go to a nursery and buy it for $18. So, like, to me, the cost benefit when it comes to
Yeah.
shrubs is like a no brainer. But I really, really had a hard time ever wanting to go buy an annual that I could grow from seed, but then again, I really enjoy growing from seed. So,
Hmm.
the answer is different for everybody. And I guess the one thing I want to say is when it comes to that, there's no right answer or wrong answer. If
Yeah.
you really don't want to deal with seeds and you have the money to buy plants from the nursery, then buy the plants from the nursery and bring them home and grow them. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
The point of gardening is to be something that you enjoy. So if you don't enjoy growing
Absolutely.
seeds, then don't do it. I mean,
Yep.
that's like, I think sometimes people feel like, okay, if I'm a gardener, then I must do all of these things. And it's just not true.
Yeah.
Do the things you like to do and don't do the things you don't like to do. It's a hobby, right? So if it's not
Yeah.
enjoyable, don't do it that way. That's really
I think
my
it's kind of easy to get caught up in the excitement this time of year, especially when you're in this group, this community we're in. We're all kind of egging each other on. Yeah, start more seeds, buy more seeds. But, if you don't want to do it this year, if you want to go and buy some and, just enjoy the process of potting them up in a container or just putting them out in your landscape, there's no shame in that. You do
no,
you.
not at all. I completely agree. When I was at the nursery, I used to teach classes on Saturdays, and I would my favorite class to teach was like beginner vegetable gardening. And I would really encourage people to grow vegetables from seeds because you have a lot more variety available to you.
Hmm.
Because some of the limitations for greenhouses producing transplants, it's difficult to manage 400 tomato varieties. I worked in a greenhouse that did 400 tomato varieties and 350 pepper varieties, and it's a nightmare to manage all of that. So I always encourage new vegetable gardeners to grow from seed. But then people kind of take that one step farther and think, well, I have to grow everything from seed. And I'd always start out by saying, only grow the things you like. If you don't like okra, don't grow okra. You're not going to like
Yep.
it just because it's in your garden and you put 8 weeks into it. You're going to eat it and you're not going to enjoy it. And you're going to think, wow, I wasted all my time on this, right? So it kind of comes down to the same thing with gardening is like, if you don't like petunias, don't put them in your garden. If you only like certain colors, then only grow those colors. It's your garden, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know. This is something I feel really strongly about. I think people have
Yeah.
some pressure towards how they approach gardening, and they really shouldn't. It's different for everyone, and they should do it in a way that they enjoy.
I like petunias, but they're budworm magnets for me. And I don't like doing the treatments on the schedule that they need to be done. So I've decided not to grow petunias for a while.
Yeah, and for me in the Northwest, the minute the rain gets on them, they get all botrytis, and the flowers just rot off, and
Hmm.
and they look ugly most of the time. And I don't mind petunias. I don't particularly love them, but they just didn't make sense for me in my garden. So
Sure.
yeah, there's people out there who only love petunias, and more power to them. That's the nice thing is there's so many plants to choose from.
Yep. Our next question is from Win. My biggest problem with my greenhouse has been keeping the panels clean, as algae forms on the inner surface, outer surface, and in between within any poorly sealed twin wall panels. What equipment and cleaning solutions do commercial greenhouses use to address this issue? Obviously, correctly sealing the panels when you build the damn thing is the only solution for the last one, but at least the other two must happen regardless.
Well, I can say that most glass greenhouses are dual pane, and they are sealed, and they still get algae inside. So everything you deal
Oh,
with in your greenhouse, we deal with too. Algae is a huge issue, especially when you use constant feed fertilizer, because every time you water, you're feeding the algae.
yeah.
So we kind of have a several prong approach. The first one is letting those areas dry if possible.
Mhm.
Now, when you're dealing with 40 acres of concrete, it's never going to be perfectly level or perfectly sloped to a drain, so you always get low spots, and they most of the time don't dry. So there's you can pressure wash them, right? Like if you have your own greenhouse, I would think it would make sense once a year to take the inner panel out, clean both sides of the panels, and then put it back in. And you can use like a light concentration of bleach for that. I don't really like it because it's not safe to handle when you're like using a big bucket and stuff like that.
Mhm.
In the greenhouse, we use a few different products. There's a class of disinfectants called quaternary and ammonium compounds. They're really common. You see them at the box stores for home use too. Most of them are plant safe, but some aren't. So I kind of don't like this guess. Another product that we use is a combination of hydrogen peroxide and peroxyacetic acid. And we just spray it on the algae and then let it sit. And then after a few days, it dies. And then we just pressure wash it up or sweep it or whatever.
Okay.
So there's items, but really like any sort of disinfectant. And if you're looking at the panels of your home greenhouse, like a mild bleach solution would really work. Or honestly, just scrubbing with soap and water and then letting it dry and then putting it back together. There's no good answer. There's some products that are like powders you can apply, but once they get wet, then they get washed off. So elbow grease is really what the answer is. That's really that's really it.
Makes sense. And our last question is from Plot Hole T. How do you keep plants alive to grow taller in those small 72 to a tray size inserts? When I buy annual starts at the store, they're up to 6 to 8 inches tall. When I grow them at home, they're stunted if I don't uppot them by 2 to 3 inches tall.
Feed. So when you have plants in a plug tray that are getting pretty big, they have a pretty well established root system. It does not take them long for them to deplete the whatever level of nutrients you have in that potting media. So the way greenhouses do it is they use a constant rate fertilizer. So every time they're watering, they're feeding. And there is a shelf life to how long those plugs can sit in the plug tray. So like a really good example would be like calibrachoas. That's something that's really, really common on the West Coast. And I think it's common in most places, maybe not so much in the South, but they go in the plug tray, they have their roots wrap around the cell. You can keep them for quite a while, but then they'll end up getting a disease called Philaviopsis. And it's a root rot that actually occurs like in aged roots.
Ah.
And what happens is this organism, it develops this like impenetrable structure inside the root, and it's like impossible to treat. You have chemicals that you can use for it, but they don't work very well, so they're not like really like worth using. So what's the answer? Just transplant them. If the goal, this is okay. I talk about Monty Don a lot as a gardener. I really enjoy what he says. His point is, for the home gardener, the goal should be from the minute you plant a seed or the minute you buy a plant, your goal is to have it grow through the rest of the season without its growth ever being checked. And so if you're buying a plug tray and your goal is to have these plants be nice and lush in your garden, it's not really feasible for the home gardener, if you have a bunch of trays, to be fertilizing them every day. Maybe it is. It depends on the person. But a much better way would be if you had some 4-inch pots or 6-inch pots or whatever, you could transplant them into fresh soil. There's already much more fertilizer in like whatever potting mix you want to use.
Yeah.
That will help keep those plants' growth from being checked. And then, you can eliminate some of this root bound issue that you can have in the plug tray. So not a real easy answer other than just fertilizer a lot, but I would be transplanting before they get that big for sure.
I actually think it's kind of funny because this goes with the question about what to start from seed. I think when we start so much stuff from seed, we end up not being able to properly take care of everything and things languish. So if we start less, we can take better care of them, get better results, and buy the rest if we're able to.
Yeah, I totally agree.
The other thing, I wonder if what C is seeing in the stores is actually plug plants being so tightly together that they're actually stretching for light, and that's why they're 6 inches tall.
Yeah, that can be too. And I can tell you, like, in all the greenhouses I've worked in, if I had a plug tray and the plants were 6 or 8 inches tall, I'd throw it away. I wouldn't even transplant it. It wouldn't go through the machine well. I mean, that's just a fact. Like, the transplanter machine would get bound up by it.
Yeah.
It would not make sense from a labor standpoint to plant it by hand. And honestly, the quality would probably be fairly diminished if it was that big. So I don't even need to know what kind of crop it is. If you're kind of generally aiming for your plants to be like 2/3 the height of the pot height. So if you have a short plug tray, it's 2 inches tall. You really don't want your plants to be 5-6 inches, because what sort of root system do you have supporting that plant down below? There's just really not enough soil there. So
yeah. And I think we've all been in a situation where we go to a garden center and we see this beautiful table full of flowers, and we reach in and pull out one, and it's just all luggy with flowers on top.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where PGRs can come into play.
Uh-huh.
And in the greenhouse too, we for space savings, we put everything down pot tight. But a lot of crops, you actually have to go back and space them so they don't grow that way. But if they sit on the bench at the nursery for a long time, that's bound to happen.
Yep. And we are through all the questions. Thank you so much, Wes. This was truly, truly amazing and insightful.
Yeah.
And I've learned so much.
Awesome. No, I'm glad to hear it. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. Thank you for making the time. I know how busy you are with the long hours of work and the traveling. Thank you. This is great.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you to our audience. and everyone who submitted big burning questions. Thanks to our listeners on YouTube and all the podcast streaming apps. You can join us on Discord to chat, listen to our BBQs live, submit your big burning questions, and see all the accompanying images we post during the recording at gardenrev.com/discord. Read our blog on gardenrev.com and see our gardens on Instagram and on YouTube at GardenRev. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wes.